Never judge someone's life when you're only looking through the window. Step inside to understand what they've truly built. For years, the people of Oakridge had whispered about the dilapidated shed at the edge of town. Its weathered boards, peeling paint, and sagging roof seemed to lean precariously with each passing season, a stark contrast to the manicured lawns and freshly painted homes that dotted the rest of the community. The shed stood on a small parcel of land just beyond where the paved roads surrendered to gravel, where the town's neat grid system dissolved into the wild uncertainty of the countryside. Oakridge itself had seen better days. Once a vibrant manufacturing hub, the closing of the central factory 5 years ago had left the town's economy as frayed as the shed's roof shingles. The main street now featured as many for-lease signs as open businesses, and the weekly town council meetings had devolved into arguments about budget cuts and diminishing services. It was at one such meeting held in the musty community center, with its flickering, fluorescent lights, that Mayor Johnson announced what he called the salvation of Oakridge. "Ladies and gentlemen," he proclaimed, his voice carrying the practiced optimism of a man who had delivered too many false promises, "I'm pleased to announce that Westridge Development has chosen our humble town for their newest eco-resort project." The crowd stirred with cautious hope as the mayor unrolled architectural renderings showing gleaming buildings nestled among restored wetlands, hiking trails, and a central lodge that promised to bring tourists and their wallets to the struggling community. The Oakridge Revival Project will create over 200 jobs and bring an estimated $2 million in annual revenue to our town. Mayor Johnson continued, his voice rising with each impressive figure. Construction could begin as early as next spring, with completion in 18 months. Only Martha Green, the 75-year-old owner of the town's general store, noticed the careful wording "could begin." She'd lived in Oakridge her entire life, had seen corporations come and go, leaving nothing but broken promises and polluted land in their wake. "What about environmental impact studies?" Martha called out, her voice stronger than her small frame suggested. "And what about property acquisitions? You can't tell me Westridge already owns all the land they need." The mayor's smile tightened. "Westridge has already secured 90% of the necessary properties. There are just a few remaining parcels to acquire, but the company is confident those negotiations will conclude successfully." Martha's eyes narrowed. She knew exactly which property would be the most difficult to acquire. At the edge of town, beyond the reach of streetlights and gossip, a thin curl of smoke rose from the crooked chimney of the old shed. Inside, far from the town meeting discussing its fate, the shed's lone inhabitant worked by the warm glow of oil lamps and the soft strains of classical music from an old battery-powered radio. Eleanor Hayes moved with deliberate grace around her pottery wheel, her slender fingers shaping wet clay with a sureness that came from thousands of hours of practice. At 32, she possessed a quiet beauty that had nothing to do with makeup or fashion. Her dark brown hair was typically pulled back in a practical braid, and her close, sturdy jeans and flannel shirts were chosen for utility rather than style. 5 years in this self-imposed exile had left their mark on her. The constant physical work had made her stronger, leaner than she'd been in her previous life as a New York architect. Her hands, once manicured for client meetings, now bore the honorable calluses of someone who built things to last. As the wheel spun beneath her skilled hands, Eleanor was oblivious to how the warm amber light from her lamps spilled through the cracks in the weathered boards, how her shadow moved across the windows, or how the scene might appear to someone watching from the darkness outside. Someone was watching, beyond the wild tangle of weeds that Eleanor deliberately let grow around her property. Maxwell Carter lowered his binoculars and made a note in his leather-bound portfolio. At 45, Maxwell carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. His tailored suit seemed out of place in rural Oakridge, but that was precisely the point. He wanted people to recognize his authority at a glance. "Lights still on at 11 p.m., he muttered into his phone's recorder. "Subject appears to be working late again. Property exterior remains deliberately neglected despite obvious occupancy." He closed his notebook with a decisive snap. Tomorrow he would make his first approach. The last piece of the puzzle would soon fall into place, just like always. Inside the shed, Eleanor remained unaware of her observer as she lifted the finished bowl from the wheel and set it carefully on a shelf to dry alongside dozens of other pieces in various stages of completion. Each bore her distinctive style, organic forms marked with intricate geometric patterns inspired by mathematical principles of the natural world. She stretched her tired shoulders and looked around her sanctuary with quiet satisfaction. No one passing by the ramshackle exterior could possibly imagine what lay within. The interior of Eleanor's home was a study in deliberate contrast. Where the outside spoke of neglect and decay, the inside revealed meticulous craftsmanship and thoughtful design. The single room had been transformed into distinct areas defined by function rather than walls. Near the center, a small wood-burning stove provided heat, its pipe rising straight through the ceiling with proper fireproof insulation. The floor, once bare dirt, was now polished concrete with radiant heating pipes beneath a system Eleanor had designed and installed herself, powered by the solar panels, hidden beneath what appeared to be rusted metal sheets on the south-facing portion of the roof. The walls were insulated with recycled denim, then covered with reclaimed wood planks that Eleanor had sanded and finished by hand. Her sleeping area occupied the eastern corner, a platform bed frame she'd built herself topped with a handcrafted quilt. A small kitchenette took up the northern wall, its countertops made from sealed butcher block, salvaged from a restaurant renovation in the nearest city. Her pottery studio dominated the western side, tools arranged with surgical precision shelves lined with completed works, waiting to be fired in the small kiln she'd restored from a school surplus auction. Only in the southern corner, where a sleek laptop sat on a desk, did hints of her former life appear. The computer was her lifeline to the outside world and to her secret identity as the acclaimed artisan Phoenix Craft, whose pottery and furniture designs commanded impressive prices from collectors who had no idea they were purchasing pieces made in a shed at the edge of a dying town. Eleanor powered down her wheel and washed her hands in the small sink, her mind already shaping plans for tomorrow's work. She had orders to fill and a new collection to complete for the online gallery that represented her work. The irony wasn't lost on her that people who would cross the street to avoid her in town would pay thousands for her art online. She pulled back the curtain on one small window and looked out at the night. The darkness comforted her, a shield between her and a world that had once wounded her deeply. Here in this improbable haven she'd created, she answered to no one. No clients demanding compromises to her design integrity. No colleagues jockeying for position and credit. No reminders of Sarah. Eleanor let the curtain fall back into place and moved to her bed. Tomorrow would be market day, her weekly journey into town for supplies. A necessary evil that required donning her carefully cultivated mask of detachment. Sleep came quickly, as it always did, after a day of physical work. But her dreams were troubled by blueprints that shifted and changed, by buildings that collapsed despite her careful calculations, and by her sister's voice calling from somewhere she couldn't reach. Morning arrived with damp mist clinging to the fields, the sun a pale watercolor wash above the eastern tree line. Eleanor rose early, as was her habit, and began her day with the same ritual that had anchored her for the past 5 years. She stoked the embers in the stove, put water on to boil, and did a series of stretches to prepare her body for the day's labor. By 7, she had loaded her bicycle with empty canvas bags for the supplies she would purchase in town. She deliberately chose the rattiest bag she owned and wore her most faded clothes for these weekly excursions. The appearance of poverty was another layer of protection, another way to keep people at a distance. The 3-mile ride into Oakridge took her past open fields, abandoned barns, and finally the first scattered houses at the town's edge. Eleanor kept her eyes forward, ignoring the occasional stares from residents watering their lawns or collecting their mail. 5 years, and still they looked at her as if she were an apparition or a curiosity. Martha's General Store sat at the corner of Oak and Main, a 2-story brick building that had weathered the town's economic decline better than most. The bell above the door jingled as Eleanor entered, the familiar sense of coffee spices and the lemon oil Martha used on the wooden shelves wrapping around her like a comfort. "Morning, Eleanor," Martha called from behind the counter, her white hair pulled back in a neat bun, her eyes sharp behind practical glasses. Unlike most of Oakridge's residents, Martha had never treated Eleanor with suspicion or pity. Their relationship wasn't exactly friendship, Eleanor had made sure of that, but it was the closest thing to human connection she allowed herself these days. "Morning, Martha. Did my clay order come in?" "Sure did. 20 pounds of that special stoneware you like. Got it in the back." Martha studied Eleanor's face for a moment. "You hear about the town meeting last night?" Eleanor shook her head as she collected flour coffee and fresh vegetables from the shelves. "You know I don't keep up with town politics," Martha snorted. Well, maybe you should start. Some developer called Westridge is planning a big resort project. They're buying up land all around yours. Eleanor's hand paused over a display of local honey. Around mine, why not just build elsewhere? Because that's not how these companies work, dear. They want what they want, and they usually get hit. Martha leaned forward, lowering her voice. The man from Westridge is staying at the Pine Valley Inn. Word is he'll be making offers to the remaining landowners today. Eleanor felt a prickle of unease, but kept her expression neutral. Well, he'll be wasting his time with me. I'm not selling. Martha nodded, unsurprised. Didn't figure you would. Just thought you should be prepared. She busied herself ringing up Eleanor's purchases, then added in a casual tone that fooled neither of them. You know your grandfather would be proud of how you've maintained that property. Eleanor's head snapped up. You knew my grandfather? Martha's eyes twinkled. Richard Hayes. Of course I knew him. Oakridge isn't that big a place, even if you young folks think it is. Richard was a good man, stubborn as they come, but good. She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. He stood his ground, too, when it mattered. Eleanor wanted to ask more, but the bell above the door jingled again as other customers entered the store. She quickly paid for her supplies and loaded them into her canvas bags, eager to avoid further interaction. As she was leaving, Martha called after her. Eleanor, there's a storm system moving in. National Weather Service says it could be a big one. You might want to secure anything that could blow away. Eleanor nodded her thanks and wheeled her bicycle back onto the street, her mind churning with this new information. A developer wanted her land, a storm was coming, and Martha knew her grandfather knew things about him that Eleanor herself might not know. She was so preoccupied that she nearly collided with a man photographing the abandoned movie theater across the street. She swerved at the last moment, causing one of her bags to slip from the bicycle rack. Whoa, sorry about that. The man reached down to catch the bag before it hit the ground. Completely my fault. I was lost in the shot. Eleanor reluctantly looked up to find herself facing a tall man in his mid-30s with unruly brown hair and intelligent eyes. He wore faded jeans and a denim jacket with numerous pockets, a professional camera hanging around his neck. It's fine, she said curtly, taking the bag from his outstretched hand. Instead of moving on, the man smiled and extended his hand. I'm Lucas Bennett. I'm a photographer working on a project about small American towns adapting to economic change. Eleanor ignored his hand. Oakridge isn't adapting, it's dying. Rather than being offended, Lucas looked intrigued. That's an honest assessment. Would you mind if I used that quote and maybe took your picture for the project? Yes, I would mind. Eleanor secured the bag more firmly on her bicycle. And I'm not interested in being part of any project. A woman approached them, notebook in hand. She was younger than Lucas, perhaps 30, with an air of determined intensity about her. Lucas, did you get the shot of the theater with the for sale sign? I want to reference it in my piece about how these development companies target towns with failing businesses. Lucas gestured to his camera. Got it from 3 angles. Oh, Rebecca, this is... He looked at Eleanor expectantly. Leaving, Eleanor finished for him, mounting her bicycle. Good day. She pedaled away quickly, feeling their curious stares on her back. Journalists, photographers, developers. It seemed the quiet life she'd carefully constructed was suddenly under siege from all sides. Back at her shed, Eleanor unloaded her supplies and immediately began assessing what needed to be secured before the storm. The National Weather Service warning was now playing on her small, battery-powered radio, predicting high winds and potential flooding by evening. She spent the afternoon hammering additional support braces inside her shed, checking that her solar panels were firmly attached and ensuring her rain barrels were empty enough to accommodate a heavy downpour. The work was physical and absorbing, allowing her to push away thoughts of developers and journalists and focus on the immediate task at hand. By late afternoon, the sky had darkened to a metallic gray and the wind had picked up significantly. Eleanor could smell the approaching storm, that distinctive scent of ozone and wet earth that preceded heavy rain. She made a final circuit of her property, gathering loose tools and materials. As she was securing her bicycle against the sheltered side of the shed, a sleek black SUV pulled up at the end of her dirt driveway. Eleanor straightened, instantly alert. The vehicle was too expensive, too clean to belong to anyone from Oakridge. A man emerged from the driver's side, and even from a distance, Eleanor could tell he wasn't local. His suit was tailored, his posture confident. As he approached, she recognized the calculated smile of someone accustomed to getting his way through charm when possible and other means when necessary. "Ms. Hayes," he called as he drew nearer. "Eleanor Hayes, I'm Maxwell Carter from Westridge Development." He held out a business card like an offering. Eleanor didn't take it. "You're trespassing, Mr. Carter." His smile didn't waver. "I apologize for the intrusion. I was hoping we might have a conversation about your property." He glanced at the shed behind her, barely concealing his disdain for what he perceived as poverty. "I believe you'll find our offer extremely generous." "I'm not interested in selling." Eleanor crossed her arms. "And now isn't a good time. There's a storm coming." Maxwell looked up at the darkening sky. "All the more reason to consider our offer. This structure hardly seems robust. Westridge is prepared to offer you 3 times the market value for this parcel. That would allow you to purchase a proper home in a safer location." Eleanor's expression remained impassive, though internally she was seething at his condescension. "Mr. Carter, I don't know how to make this clearer. This property is not for sale. Not at market value, not at 3 times market value, not at any price." For a brief moment, Maxwell's practiced smile faltered, revealing something harder beneath. "Saiton, Hayes, I understand your attachment to your home, but you should know that the Oakridge Revival Project is going forward. Your property is the final piece we need. Without it, we'll be forced to build around you." "Then build around me." Eleanor gestured to the vast open fields surrounding her small plot. "There's plenty of space." "Unfortunately, it's not that simple. Your property contains a crucial access point for our planned nature trail system. Without it, the entire eastern section of the development would need to be redesigned." He pulled a folder from his jacket. "If you just look at our proposal—" "No." Eleanor's voice was firm. "My answer is final. Now please leave my property before the storm hits." Maxwell's smile disappeared completely. "Ms. Hayes, I don't think you understand what's at stake here. This development will revitalize Oakridge. It will bring Gee's tourism tax revenue. Do you really want to be the person who stands in the way of your community's salvation?" Eleanor stepped closer, her voice low but intense. "Mr. Carter, I don't think you understand. I'm a licensed architect with a master's degree in environmental design. I've reviewed developments like yours before, and I know exactly what they deliver and what they destroy. Your eco-resort will bring minimum wage seasonal jobs, increased traffic, water usage problems, and habitat destruction. The only real winners will be Westridge shareholders." Maxwell's eyes widened slightly, clearly, not expecting this level of expertise from someone living in what appeared to be squalor. "Now," Eleanor continued, "for the last time, please leave my property. The storm is coming and I need to prepare." As if on cue, a powerful gust of wind swept across the field, then bending the tall grasses and carrying the first heavy droplets of rain. Maxwell retreated a few steps, his expression hardening. "This isn't over, Ms. Hayes. Westridge doesn't give up easily." He turned and walked quickly back to his SUV just as the sky opened up, rain beginning to fall in earnest. Eleanor watched until his vehicle disappeared down the dirt road, then hurried inside her shed, securing the door against the increasingly violent wind. She moved to the small window, watching as the storm transformed the landscape, turning the dirt road into mud and bending the trees along the property line. Her encounter with Maxwell Carter had left her unsettled in a way she hadn't experienced in years. Not because of his threats, she'd dealt with corporate intimidation before, but because it represented an intrusion of her past life into the present one. The architect she'd once been and the recluse she'd become were worlds that were never supposed to intersect. As lightning flashed briefly, illuminating the interior of her home, Eleanor's eyes fell on a small frame photograph, the only personal item displayed in her otherwise utilitarian space. A younger version of herself stood smiling next to a woman with the same dark hair and similar features, though her smile was wider, more carefree, Sarah. Eleanor turned away from the photograph, unable to bear her sister's frozen smile. 5 years since the accident, and still the guilt rose up to choke her whenever she allowed herself to remember. She focused instead on checking her roof for leaks as the rain intensified, grateful for the physical distraction. The storm grew fiercer as evening approached. Eleanor's weather radio crackled with emergency updates reporting flash flood warnings and wind gusts approaching 70 miles per hour. She added wood to her stove, grateful for its steady warmth as the temperature outside dropped. The worst of the storm arrived around 8 o'clock. The wind howled through the trees, driving rain against the walls of the shed with such force it sounded like gravel being thrown. Despite the ferocity outside, Eleanor felt secure in her carefully reinforced home. The roof she'd meticulously repaired held firm. The extra bracing she'd installed prevented the walls from flexing too much in the gusts, and the drainage trenches she dug around the perimeter kept water from pooling against the foundation. She was sketching designs for a new pottery collection when headlights swept across her window. Eleanor frowned, setting aside her notebook. Who would be out in such conditions? Maxwell Carter returning for another attempt at persuasion. A car engine sputtered and died, followed by the sound of doors opening and voices raised against the storm. Eleanor peered through the rain-streaked window to see two figures struggling toward her shed, one tall, one shorter, both hunched against the wind and rain. A knock came at her door, urgent and repeated. Eleanor hesitated, her instinct for privacy warring with basic human decency. No one should be out in a storm like this. "Hello," a male voice called through the door. "Is anyone there? Our car's stalled in the floodwater. We need shelter until the storm passes." With reluctance, Eleanor unbolted her door, opening it just enough to confirm the identities of her unexpected visitors. Lightning flashed, illuminating the rain-soaked figures of Lucas Bennett and his journalist friend Rebecca. "You, Bo," Eleanor said flatly. Lucas offered a sheepish smile, rain dripping from his hair. "I promise we're not stalking you. We were trying to get back to our motel when the road flooded. Your light was the only one we could see." Rebecca sneezed violently, her thin frame shivering in her drenched clothes. "Please," she managed, "just until the storm lets up or the road clears." Eleanor looked past them to where their cars sat half submerged in what had been a shallow ditch, but was now a rushing stream. The storm showed no signs of abating. With a sigh of resignation, she pulled the door open wider. "Come in, but touch nothing without permission." Lucas and Rebecca stumbled inside, dripping water onto the concrete floor. They stood just inside the doorway, clearly trying to be respectful, but Eleanor could see the exact moment when they registered the disparity between the shed's exterior and its interior. Their expressions shifted from grateful relief to undisguised astonishment. "This is not what I expected," Rebecca murmured, taking in the polished concrete floors, the warm glow of the oil lamps, the pottery studio with its rows of finished pieces. "What were you expecting? Dirt floors and a camping stove?" Eleanor's tone was dry as she retrieved two clean towels from a cabinet. "Dry yourselves. There's a hook by the door for your wet coats." Lucas accepted the towel with genuine gratitude, his photographer's eye scanning the space with professional appreciation. "The contrast between outside and inside is remarkable. It's almost like a deliberate design choice," Eleanor finished for him. "It is." She moved to the stove, putting on a kettle for tea, more to give herself something to do than out of hospitality. Having strangers in her space and her sanctuary made her skin prickle with discomfort. 5 years of carefully maintained solitude broken by a single storm. Rebecca had stopped shivering, but now she was staring at the pottery with dawning recognition. "These pieces, they look like phoenix craft." She turned to Eleanor, eyes wide. Are you E.H. Eleanor Hayes?" Eleanor's hand stilled on the kettle. Of course a journalist would make the connection. "Does it matter?" "Does it matter?" Rebecca repeated incredulously. "Phoenix craft pieces sell for thousands of dollars in galleries in New York and San Francisco. Your work has been featured in Architectural Digest. There's a waiting list months long for your custom furniture pieces." Lucas was examining a bowl on a nearby shelf, careful not to touch it. "I photographed an exhibition in Chicago last year that featured your work. The curator called you the most enigmatic artist of the modern craft revival movement." Eleanor poured hot water into 3 mugs, dropping tea bags into each. "I prefer enigmatic to reclusive. Sounds more deliberate." She handed them each a mug. "Now you know what I do and who I am. The question is, what do you intend to do with that information?" Rebecca clutched her mug, steam rising between them. "I'm not here for a story about you if that's what you're worried about. I'm investigating Westridge development." Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. Why some? Because they follow the same pattern in every community they target. Rebecca explained her professional intensity breaking through her earlier discomfort. They promise eco-friendly development jobs and tourism dollars. What they deliver is environmental damage, seasonal minimum wage positions, and profits that never reach the local economy. Their Montana project resulted in significant contamination of the local watershed, Lucas added. Rebecca's been tracking their activities across 3 states. Eleanor sipped her tea considering this information. Their representative visited me today, Maxwell Carter. Rebecca and Lucas exchanged glances. Tall guy, expensive suit, smile that doesn't reach his eyes, Lucas asked. Eleanor nodded. That's him, Rebecca confirmed. He's their cleanup specialist. When a community starts asking too many questions, Carter comes in to smooth things over or to apply pressure where needed. A particularly violent gust of wind rattled the windows, drawing their attention momentarily to the storm still raging outside. In the brief silence, Eleanor noticed Rebecca's gaze lingering on the small framed photograph of her and Sarah. Your sister? Rebecca asked softly. Eleanor felt the familiar tightness in her chest. Yes, you look alike. We did. Eleanor set down her mug, the finality in her tone closing the subject. Lucas, sensing the tension, changed the topic. Your home is incredible. The way you've maximized the small space, the sustainable systems, it's exactly the kind of resilience I'm documenting in my project. I'm not part of your project, Eleanor said firmly. I agreed to shelter you from the storm, not to become a subject for your photography. Lucas raised his hands in surrender. Understood. No photos without permission. But may I ask why you've chosen to maintain the exterior appearance of, well, dilapidation, Eleanor supplied. Because appearances matter in ways most people don't understand. The exterior of this place tells a story that keeps people away. It's a boundary as effective as any fence or wall. But why do you want people to stay away, Rebecca pressed? With your talent, your success. Because privacy has value, Eleanor interrupted. Because I earn the right to determine who enters my space and who doesn't. Because the world is full of Maxwell Carters who think they can buy or take whatever they want. The conversation might have grown more heated, but a sudden crash from outside interrupted them. Eleanor moved quickly to the window, peering out into the darkness. Lightning flashed, revealing a figure struggling near the edge of her property. Someone's out there? She said, grabbing a raincoat and flashlight. Stay here, Buffam. Before Lucas or Rebecca could protest, Eleanor had slipped outside into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her off her feet as she made her way toward the thrashing figure, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly through the darkness. As she drew closer, she could see it was a man, his foot caught in what appeared to be one of her drainage ditches, now overflowing with rushing water. The man looked up, squinting against her flashlight beam in the driving rain. Even through the downpour, Eleanor recognized him, one of the local men who worked for the town maintenance department. He'd always been among those who stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and disdain when she passed through town. Help, he shouted over the wind. My truck got stuck on the main road. I was trying to find higher ground. Eleanor reached him, assessing the situation quickly. His foot wasn't just caught, it was pinned by a section of drainage pipe that had come loose in the flood. She knelt in the mud, working to free him, despite the water rushing around them both. When I lift this, pull your foot out immediately, she instructed, positioning her hands beneath the pipe. With a grunt of effort, she lifted the heavy pipe just enough for him to extract his foot. Can you walk? She shouted over the storm. He tested his weight gingerly. Think it's just twisted, not broken. My place is closer than town. Come on. Eleanor helped support him as they made their way back to the shed, both drenched and mud-covered by the time they reached the door. Lucas opened the door at their approach, his eyes widening at the sight of them. What happened? Jim Rollins. Rebecca recognized the man as Eleanor helped him inside. The town maintenance supervisor, Jim nodded, clearly embarrassed to be in this situation, rescued by the woman the town pitied and half feared, and in the presence of the journalists who'd been asking questions around town. Got caught in the flash flood trying to check the culverts on Miller Road. Eleanor retrieved her first aid kit and knelt to examine his ankle. It's swollen, but I don't think it's broken. You'll need to stay off it for tonight at least. Jim looked around the shed interior, his amazement even more pronounced than Lucas and Rebecca's had been. I mean, folks in town always said you lived like... Like what, Mr. Rawlins? Eleanor's voice was calm as she wrapped his ankle, but there was an edge to it. Like, rough, I guess. Everyone says you're barely getting by out here. He gestured to the well-appointed interior. But this is nicer than my house in town. Eleanor finished bandaging his ankle and stood. Appearances can be deceiving. Something to remember next time you and your friends at the diner are discussing my living situation. Jim had the grace to look ashamed. I'm sorry, Ms. Hayes, and thank you for helping me. The storm continued to rage outside, stranding all four unlikely companions in Eleanor's carefully guarded sanctuary. As the night wore on, an uneasy truce formed between them. Eleanor provided dry clothes oversized on Rebecca, but fitting Lucas and Jim reasonably well, and prepared a simple meal from her supplies. Conversation remained minimal and cautious, but Eleanor could feel her carefully constructed walls beginning to develop hairline cracks. Each question answered, each small interaction was an unwilling step back toward the world she'd left behind. And as much as she resisted it, part of her recognized the bitter irony she had designed this place to keep people out. Yet here they were, three strangers huddled around her table, while the storm raged impotently against her reinforced walls. The night stretched long before them, filled with the sounds of wind and rain and the occasional crash of thunder. In the soft glow of the oil lamps, Eleanor felt the weight of their curious gazes and the pressure of their unasked questions. By morning, she knew her life would be irrevocably changed. Her solitude breached her sanctuary, revealed her carefully guarded secret, exposed to the light. Outside, the storm showed no signs of abating, water pooling in the low areas of her property and wine testing the strength of her handiwork. But the real tempest, Eleanor sensed, was yet to come. Dawn arrived with uncertain light filtering through clouds that hung low and heavy over Oakridge. The storm had weakened overnight, the howling winds giving way to a steady soaking rain that drummed against the shed's roof. Eleanor had slept little, keeping one eye on her unexpected guests while monitoring the weather updates on her radio. The flash flood warnings remained in effect, with several roads around town reportedly underwater. Jim Rollins sat by the window, watching the water level in the drainage ditches around Eleanor's property. His borrowed clothes, a faded flannel shirt, and canvas work pants made him look more like a farmer than the town maintenance supervisor. The swelling in his ankle had gone down, but he still winced when he put weight on it. Miller Road's going to be washed out for sure, he muttered, more to himself than to the room. Haven't seen flooding like this since the '98 storms. Lucas was checking his camera equipment, relieved to find that his waterproof cases had protected his gear from damage. Rebecca sat at Eleanor's small table, making notes in a pocket-sized journal, occasionally glancing at their reluctant host with barely concealed curiosity. Eleanor moved about her morning routine, as if she were alone, heating water for coffee, checking her roof for leaks, inventorying her food supplies. But the weight of their presence pressed against her, disrupting the careful rhythms she had established over 5 years of solitude. The National Weather Service says the worst has passed, she announced after listening to the latest update. The roads should be passable by afternoon. She didn't need to add how eager she was for that moment to arrive. Jim cleared his throat. Ms. Hayes, I can't thank you enough for what you did last night. If you hadn't found me... He let the sentence hang unfinished. Eleanor nodded once, acknowledging his gratitude without inviting further conversation. She poured coffee into mismatched mugs and set them on the table without ceremony. I should check on your car, she said to Lucas and Rebecca. The water level might have dropped enough to reach it. Lucas stood quickly. I'll come with you. Eleanor wanted to refuse to insist on her solitude, even in this simple task, but something in his expression, earnest without the pity or judgment she was accustomed to seeing, made her nod reluctantly. They stepped outside into the gray morning, the rain now a fine mist that clung to their skin. The land around the shed had transformed overnight, water standing in shallow pools across the fields, debris from the storm scattered like the aftermath of a careless giant's passage. Your place held up remarkably well, Lucas observed as they picked their way along the muddy path toward the road. Most buildings in town didn't fare so well. Eleanor kept her eyes on the sodden ground ahead. I reinforced the structure when I moved in, double-braced the roof trusses, installed proper drainage, waterproofed the foundation. With your architectural background, she glanced at him sharply. Rebecca's research is thorough. She's good at her job. Lucas carefully stepped over a fallen branch. For what it's worth, we're not here to expose you or your lifestyle. Rebecca's focused on Westridge, and I'm documenting communities in transition. And yet here you are in my home, learning my secrets. The bitterness in Eleanor's voice was unmistakable. Lucas stopped walking, forcing Eleanor to pause as well. Look, I understand valuing privacy. I spent 3 years living with a nomadic group in Mongolia for a photography project. When I came back to the States, everything felt too loud, too crowded, too intrusive. I rented a cabin in the Colorado wilderness for 6 months just to decompress. Eleanor studied him with new interest. And now you're back in the noise. On my own terms. Lucas gestured to his camera. This gives me a buffer, a way to engage with the world while maintaining some distance. He hesitated before adding, we all build walls in our own way, Eleanor. Yours are just more literal than most. They continued in silence until they reached the spot where Lucas's car had been stranded. The vehicle sat at an angle, its front wheels in what was now a muddy ditch, rather than the rushing stream of the night before. Water had receded enough to reveal the undercarriage, but the car was thoroughly stuck. We'll need a tow, Lucas said, surveying the damage with resignation. The engine's probably flooded too. Eleanor nodded. Jim can radio for help once he gets back to town. There's a mechanic who has a tow truck. As they turned back toward the shed, Lucas paused to take a photograph of the storm's aftermath. The flooded fields, the distant town, and Eleanor's shed standing firm amidst the chaos, its weathered exterior a stark contrast to the destruction around it. I didn't give you permission to photograph my home, Eleanor said, her voice tight. Lucas lowered his camera. You're right, I apologize. He showed her the display and deleted the image with a press of a button. Professional Babbitt, I should have asked. The simple act, his immediate acknowledgement of her boundary, caught Eleanor off guard. She was accustomed to having to fight for her privacy, to being dismissed or patronized when she asserted her limits. This easy respect was unexpected. They returned to find Jim and Rebecca in what appeared to be a tense conversation, falling silent as the door opened. Car's stuck, Lucas reported. We'll need a tow. Jim nodded. I can radio Ben's auto when I get back to the maintenance office. He's probably got his hands full with emergency calls today, though. Eleanor moved to her storage cabinet and retrieved a pair of crutches. These should help you get back to town. I made them when I sprained my ankle last winter. Jim accepted the crutches with surprise. You made these from ash saplings that came down in an ice storm. Eleanor adjusted the height to fit his frame. They're sturdy. The maintenance supervisor tested his weight on them, nodding with approval. Perfect fit, thank you, Ms. Hayes. Rebecca closed her notebook and stood. I should head back to town too. There's a town council meeting this afternoon to discuss emergency response to the storm. Mayor Johnson specifically mentioned the Westridge project as a priority for recovery efforts. Of course he did, Eleanor said dryly, being like a natural disaster to push through development approvals while people are distracted by crisis. Rebecca's eyes gleamed with journalistic interest. Exactly my thought. Would you mind if I quoted that perspective anonymously, of course? Eleanor hesitated, weighing the request. For years, she had deliberately remained silent on local issues, knowing that engagement would only invite more intrusion. But now, with Westridge targeting her land and the town potentially supporting their efforts, perhaps silence was no longer a viable strategy. You can quote me, she decided, not anonymously. Eleanor Hayes, former senior architect with Harrington and Associates, current resident, whose property is being targeted by Westridge Development. Rebecca smiled for the first time since arriving, a quick flash of genuine pleasure. Thank you. That carries weight. As they prepared to depart, Jim awkwardly cleared his throat again. Ms. Hayes, about the things people say in town. I'm going to set them straight. What you've built here, it's impressive. And what you did for me last night, well, not everyone would have come out in that storm to help someone who's never been particularly friendly to them. Eleanor nodded, uncomfortable with his earnestness, but acknowledging the olive branch he was extending. The roads will be worse than you expect. Stay on the high ground along Miller Ridge if you can. With a final round of thanks, Jim and Rebecca set off toward town, leaving Eleanor alone with Lucas, whose presence now seemed even more intrusive without the buffer of the others. I should check my pottery, she said abruptly, moving toward her workshop area. Some pieces might have cracked in the humidity changes. Lucas remained by the door, respecting her space. I can wait outside if you'd prefer to be alone. The offer was sincere, and for a moment Eleanor was tempted to accept it. But the rain was still falling, and something about Lucas, perhaps his own admission of seeking solitude after Mongolia, made her reconsider. No, that's not necessary. Just don't touch anything without asking. She busied herself with inspecting her work, checking each piece for damage, reorganizing shelves that had shifted during the storm. Lucas sat quietly on a stool near the door, his presence less abrasive than she'd expected. The silence between them gradually shifted from tense to something approaching companionable. The calm was shattered by the sound of an engine approaching, tires squelching through mud. Eleanor moved to the window, her body tensing at the sight of the familiar black SUV pulling up outside. "Maxwell Carter," she said, her voice flat. "He doesn't waste time." Lucas joined her at the window. "Want me to get rid of him? I can say you're not available." The offer was unexpected, as was the small surge of gratitude Eleanor felt in response. "No, I need to deal with him myself." She squared her shoulders and opened the door just as Maxwell reached it, his hand raised to knock. He wore the same immaculate suit as the day before, somehow untouched by the mud and water surrounding them. His surprise at seeing Lucas behind Eleanor was quickly masked by his professional smile. "Ms. Hayes, I'm glad to see you weathered the storm safely." His gaze traveled past her to take in the shed's interior, visible now with the door open. Something flickered in his eyes, reassessment perhaps, or calculation. "I was concerned about the structural integrity of your residence." "As you can see, my concerns were unfounded," Eleanor replied coolly. "What brings you back so soon, Mr. Carter?" "I believe I made my position clear yesterday." Maxwell's smile tightened fractionally. "The storm has changed the situation, Ms. Hayes. The town council has called an emergency meeting to discuss recovery efforts. Westridge has offered substantial financial assistance for rebuilding, contingent, of course, on the approval of our development plans." "Disaster capitalism at its finest," Lucas murmured behind her. Maxwell's gaze shifted to him, eyes narrowing. "I don't believe we've met." "Lucas Bennett, I'm documenting the impact of corporate development on small American communities." Lucas's tone was pleasant, but the challenge in his words was unmistakable. "How fascinating," Maxwell replied without interest, returning his attention to Eleanor. "Ms. Hayes, I understand your reluctance to sell, but in light of the storm damage throughout the area, I'm authorized to increase our offer to 5 times market value. This is an unprecedented opportunity for you to what Mr. Carter abandoned my home, allow you to destroy the ecosystem here for profit. The storm hasn't changed my answer. If anything, it's reinforced it. My property withstood the worst weather in decades without significant damage, while your proposed development would have been underwater." Maxwell's facade of friendliness slipped further. "The Oakridge Revival Project includes state-of-the-art flood mitigation systems. Systems that would benefit the entire community, including the land surrounding your property." "Which is exactly why you need my land," Eleanor countered. "For water runoff management. You're not planning a nature trail. You're planning a drainage system that would funnel contaminated water from your development across my property and into the watershed beyond." The flash of surprise across Maxwell's face confirmed her assessment, and Eleanor felt a grim satisfaction. 5 years away from architectural practice hadn't dulled her ability to read between the lines of development proposals. "You're making assumptions based on incomplete information," Maxwell said, recovering quickly. "Our environmental impact studies would never pass peer review," Eleanor finished for him. "I've seen the preliminary reports filed with the county. Your hydrology models are based on outdated rainfall projections that don't account for climate change patterns in this region. Last night's storm is exactly the kind of event your models dismiss as a once-in-a-century occurrence, when in reality we've had 3 similar events in the past decade." Maxwell's expression hardened, the pleasant veneer dropping away entirely. "Ms. Hayes, I'm trying to be reasonable here, but you're forcing my hand. Westridge Development has the full support of the town council. If necessary, we can pursue eminent domain proceedings." "On what grounds? Economic necessity?" Eleanor shook her head. "You'd need to prove your specific plan is the only viable option for economic development. Good luck making that case when your environmental impact statements are challenged by expert testimony." Maxwell stepped closer, lowering his voice. Do you really want to fight this battle, Miss Hayes, a recluse living in a shed against a company with legal teams in 3 states? How long do you think you can hold out once the pressure starts? Once building inspectors start finding code violations, once the county reassesses your property taxes based on improvements you've clearly made without permits. Are you threatening me, Mr. Carter? Eleanor's voice remained steady, though she felt a cold knot forming in her stomach. I'm describing reality, Maxwell replied. Fine. This project is happening. The only question is whether you benefit from it or become collateral damage. Lucas stepped forward, camera in hand. This conversation sounds like it would make an excellent addition to my documentary on corporate intimidation tactics. Mind if I record it for accuracy? Maxwell stepped back, his expression shuddering. That won't be necessary. I was simply outlining options for Ms. Hayes' consideration. He reached into his jacket and produced a business card. My direct number is on the back. When you're ready to discuss this, reasonably call me. The offer expires at the end of the week. He turned and walked back to his SUV, his polished shoes incongruous against the muddy ground. Eleanor watched him go, the card untouched in her hand. Well, Lucas said as the vehicle pulled away, he seems charming. Eleanor closed the door, her mind racing. Maxwell's threats weren't idle. She knew enough about development politics to recognize the tactics. Westridge would use every tool at their disposal. Legal pressure, regulatory harassment, public opinion, manipulation. The sanctuary she had built was suddenly on borrowed time. Are you all right? Lucas asked, his earlier lightness replaced by genuine concern. Eleanor moved to her workbench, needing something solid to lean against. 5 years, she said quietly. 5 years of peace, of building something that was just mine. And now you fight, Lucas finished for her, if that's what you want to do. She looked up sharply, as opposed to what, giving and letting them destroy everything I've created here. Lucas shook his head. As opposed to fighting alone. You have allies, Eleanor. Rebecca's investigation into Westridge has already uncovered enough to delay their projects in 2 other states. Jim Rollins owes you his life, and he has influence in town. Martha Green clearly respects you. And You what? Eleanor challenged. You want to turn my story into your next award-winning photo essay? The accusation hung between them, harsh in the quiet room. Lucas didn't respond immediately, his expression thoughtful rather than defensive. 5 years ago, he finally said, I was in Mongolia photographing the effects of climate change on nomadic herding communities. There was a family that had lost nearly everything to an extreme winter, what they call a dzud. Their livestock dead, their traditional way of life threatened. The husband wanted to move to the city to give up. The wife refused. She said, this land knows us. The city has no memory of our name. He met Eleanor's gaze directly. I'm not comparing your situation to theirs. But I recognized something in you the moment we met. The same fierce determination to hold your ground, to build something meaningful in a world that would rather you conform. So no, I don't want to turn your story into my next project, but I would be honored to help you protect what you have built. Eleanor stared at him, caught off guard by his sincerity. Before she could formulate a response, a knock at the door broke the moment. Martha Green stood outside, a large wicker basket over one arm. Thought you might need provisions after sheltering half the town last night, she announced, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. She nodded to Lucas. Mr. Bennett, I see you found refuge here too. Martha, Eleanor acknowledged, both annoyed and relieved by the interruption. You didn't need to bring supplies. I'm well stocked. These aren't just supplies, dear. Martha set the basket on the table and began unpacking it. These are answers. Eleanor approached cautiously. The basket contained not food as she had expected, but a wooden box weathered with age, its brass hinges tarnished to a dull green. Alongside it lay several folders filled with papers, their edges yellowed and curling. What is this? Martha placed her gnarled hand on the box. Your grandfather's legacy. Richard Hayes was more than just a stubborn old man who lived in a shed. Before that, he was the finest architect this county ever produced. And William Carter Maxwell's father was the man who destroyed him. Eleanor felt as if the floor had shifted beneath her. My grandfather was an architect. Martha nodded, her eyes soft with memory. One of the best. Designed half the significant buildings in the county, including the original community center in Oakridge. He believed in building with the land, not against it. His designs worked with natural water flow, prevailing winds, seasonal light changes. Sustainable architecture, Lucas murmured, before it had a name. Exactly so. Martha began laying out papers from the folders, blueprints, newspaper clippings, legal documents. Richard and William Carter were partners once, if you can believe it. Carter and Hayes Design, founded in 1973. They had different visions from the start. Richard wanted to create buildings that would last generations, that would enhance rather than exploit the land. William was more interested in quick profits. Eleanor picked up one of the blueprints, her trained eye immediately recognizing the quality of the work. The design showed a community of small homes arranged around shared green spaces with natural water features and orientation that would maximize passive solar heating. This is remarkable, she breathed, especially for its time. Martha nodded. That was the Riverside Eco Community, Richard's dream project. He spent years developing the concept, securing the land, lining up investors. It would have transformed the region, affordable, sustainable housing when most developers were throwing up cookie-cutter subdivisions. Lucas examined another document, this one a legal contract. What happened? Martha's expression darkened. William Carter happened. While Richard was focused on design and environmental impact studies, William was quietly restructuring the company finances. He created shell corporations, moved assets, manipulated the books. By the time Richard discovered what was happening, William had effectively stolen the company from under him. He couldn't fight it legally. Eleanor asked, a sick feeling growing in her stomach. He tried, but William had covered his tracks well, and he had connections with judges and regulators that Richard didn't. The legal battle dragged on for years, draining what little money Richard had left. In the end, all he managed to keep was this parcel of land, too small and oddly shaped for William to bother with. Martha opened the wooden box, revealing stacks of letters, photographs, in a small leather journal. Richard moved out here, built the shed, and lived his remaining years in isolation. Most people thought he had lost his mind after losing his business, but he was working on something right up until he died, documenting everything William Carter had done, gathering evidence that might someday bring the truth to light. Eleanor lifted a photograph from the box. It showed two men standing in front of an office building, arms around each other's shoulders, smiling broadly. Despite the decades that had passed, she immediately recognized her grandfather. She had his same eyes, the same determined set to his jaw. Beside him stood a younger man with a smile that didn't quite reach his calculating eyes. William Carter, Martha confirmed, following Eleanor's gaze. And if you're wondering, yes, Maxwell is the spitting image of his father. Same charm, masking the same ruthlessness. Eleanor set the photograph down carefully. Why are you showing me this now, Martha? Why not when I first moved here? The older woman sighed. You weren't ready to hear it. You came here running from something, girl. I could see that plain as day. You needed this place to be your sanctuary, not a battlefield with history echoing through it. She gestured to the papers spread across the table. But now Westridge is coming for this land, and you need to understand what you're really fighting for. Lucas had been examining the documents with growing interest. This is more than just historical context, he said, holding up a survey map. These documents could be legally significant. Look at this original watershed mapping from before any development occurred in the region. This would be crucial evidence in challenging Westridge's environmental impact statements. Martha nodded approvingly. You're quick, Mr. Bennett. Yes, Richard wasn't just wallowing in defeat out here. He was building a case not for himself but for whoever came after him. He knew William Carter wouldn't stop with one stolen project. He was playing the long game. Eleanor felt overwhelmed by the revelations. Her connection to this land wasn't just the random inheritance she'd always believed it to be. It was a deliberate passing of the torch, a continuation of a battle she hadn't known existed. Did my mother know about this? She asked Martha. About her father's work, the feud with the Carters? Martha shook her head. Diane left Oakridge when she was 18, wanted nothing to do with her father's obsessions. She saw his retreat to this place as surrender, as weakness. She couldn't understand that sometimes holding your ground is the greatest act of courage. Eleanor thought of her own retreat to this shed 5 years ago, how Sarah had argued with her about it in those final days. You're hiding, Ellie, running away from your career, from your talent, from life itself. The parallels were uncomfortable, too close to examine fully in this moment of revelation. There's something else you should know. Martha continued, pulling a large folded document from the bottom of the pile. Something William Carter wanted badly enough that he tried to break into this shed the night after your grandfather died. She unfolded the document, carefully revealing a detailed geological survey map of the region. Unlike the other papers, this one showed signs of having been hastily repaired, tape holding tears, together water stains along one edge. Richard discovered an aquifer, a significant underground water source running beneath this property. Martha explained, pointing to notations on the map. It feeds into the river system 10 miles south, and it's remarkably pure. William wanted to tap it for a bottling operation, but Richard refused to sell. After the feud, William assumed he'd eventually get the land through tax sales or other pressure. But my grandfather held out, Eleanor said. Until his dying day, Martha confirmed, and he made sure this place would pass directly to a haze bypassing probate and public records. He knew the water would become even more valuable as time passed. Lucas studied the map intently. This explains Westridge's interest. They're not just after your land for drainage, they want to control the aquifer. Bottled water is a multi-billion-dollar industry now. Eleanor thought of Maxwell's increased offer, his veiled threats, and they'll do whatever it takes to get it. Martha gathered the documents, returning them to their folders. Richard believed there would come a time when someone would need to finish what he started to expose the Carter family's methods and protect this land. He hoped it would be someone with the knowledge and strength to succeed where he had failed. She fixed Eleanor with a pointed look. He would have been proud to see what you've built here, girl. Not just the physical structure, impressive as that is, but the life you've crafted on your own terms. Now the question is, will you take up his fight as well? The weight of the question hung in the air between them. Eleanor had come to this place seeking escape, seeking anonymity and peace. The thought of stepping into a public battle against a powerful corporation, of linking her name to a decades-old feud, made her instinctively recoil. And yet, she ran her fingers over the blueprints her grandfather had drawn, feeling a connection to him she'd never known in life. The principles that had guided his work, sustainability, harmony with the natural world buildings that served their inhabitants rather than their developers, were the same ones she had once championed at Harrington and Associates before compromise and corporate pressure had driven her away. Before she could respond, the sound of vehicles approaching broke the moment. Eleanor moved to the window, her heart sinking at the sight of several cars and trucks pulling up outside. Looks like news of your interior decorating skills has spread, Lucas observed, joining her. Jim Rollins works fast. Indeed, Jim was among the group, now emerging from the vehicles, still using the crutches Eleanor had made. Beside him was Rebecca, notebook in hand, and several other townspeople Eleanor recognized from her infrequent trips to Oakridge. What do they want? She asked, tension evident in her voice. Martha peered through the window. That's Ben with his tow truck, probably for Mr. Bennett's car, and Sarah Jenkins from the hardware store. Looks like Thomas Lee from the diner, too. Eleanor felt trapped, cornered. Her sanctuary was becoming a spectacle, her privacy evaporating like morning mist under a harsh sun. I'll get rid of them, Lucas offered, seeing her distress. No, Martha countered firmly. Eleanor needs to face this. The town has misunderstood her for years. It's time they saw the truth, and it's time she stopped hiding from it. Eleanor bristled at the blunt assessment. I'm not hiding. I'm choosing privacy. Martha's expression softened. Child, there's a difference between privacy and isolation. One nurtures the soul, the other starves it. Before Eleanor could argue further, a knock came at the door. After a moment's hesitation, she opened it to find Jim Rollins standing there, his expression sheepish. Ms. Hayes, I hope we're not intruding. Ben came to tow Mr. Bennett's car and, well, he gestured vaguely to the others. Word got around about what you did for me last night and about your home. People wanted to thank you and to see for themselves. Eleanor stood frozen in the doorway, torn between slamming the door and reluctantly admitting her neighbors. The decision was made for her when Sarah Jenkins stepped forward, arms laden with supplies. We brought materials to help with any storm repairs, the hardware store owner explained. Roofing nails, tar paper sealant, whatever you might need. Thomas Lee from the diner held up a large insulated container. And hot food. Figure you might be tired of cooking for guests. Their genuine concern caught Eleanor off guard. For years, she had perceived the town's attention as judgmental, pitying. The possibility that it might contain actual neighborly care had never occurred to her. With a reluctance she couldn't entirely hide, Eleanor stepped back, allowing them to enter. Their reactions to the interior of the shed were similar to Jim's the night before shock, giving way to admiration as they took in the skilled craftsmanship, the ingenious use of space, the evidence of artistic talent in every corner. "You built all this?" Sarah asked, running a hand over a perfectly joined shelf. "Most of it," Eleanor confirmed, uncomfortable with the attention. "Repurposed materials when possible." Thomas was examining her pottery collection with obvious appreciation. "These are incredible. You should be selling these at the craft fair during the Founders' Day celebration." A murmur of agreement ran through the group, and Eleanor felt a flush of mingled embarrassment and pride. For so long, she had kept her talents hidden behind her shed's weathered exterior, sharing her work only through the anonymous shield of her online persona. To have it acknowledged directly by people who had previously dismissed her was a disorienting shift. Rebecca moved through the group, taking notes, occasionally asking quiet questions. Her presence reminded Eleanor of the larger context. This wasn't just about neighborly reconciliation. Westridge's shadow still loomed over her property, over the aquifer that flowed beneath it, over her grandfather's legacy. As the impromptu gathering continued, Eleanor gradually felt her defensive walls softening, not crumbling, but perhaps developing small, intentional openings. These people weren't the enemies she had imagined them to be. They were simply humans, flawed and limited in their understanding, as she was herself. When Ben announced that Lucas's car was hooked up to the tow truck ready to be pulled from the ditch, the group began to disperse. They left behind their supplies, their thanks, and something less tangible, but more significant, a tentative bridge across the chasm Eleanor had believed separated her from the community. As Martha prepared to leave with the others, she pressed the wooden box into Eleanor's hands. "Read his journal," she urged quietly. "Understand what you're fighting for. And remember, Richard stood alone, but you don't have to." After they had gone, the shed felt strangely empty, despite Lucas's continued presence. Eleanor moved to the window, watching the procession of vehicles making their way back toward town, leaving tracks in the still muddy road. "Well," Lucas said, breaking the silence, "that was unexpected." Eleanor nodded, still processing the morning's revelations and the town's surprising gesture of goodwill. "Everything about today has been unexpected." Lucas gestured to the wooden box in her hands. "Are you going to read it?" Eleanor traced the worn edges of the box, feeling the weight of her grandfather's history of the battle he had fought alone. "Yes," she decided. "I need to understand what I've inherited, all of it, not just the land." She set the box on her table and carefully lifted out the leather journal. Its pages were filled with her grandfather's precise handwriting, diagrams, calculations, and occasional sketches of the landscape. As she read, the full story emerged: Richard Hayes's vision for sustainable development, his partnership with William Carter, the gradual realization that his partner was corrupting their shared dream, the bitter legal battles, and finally his retreat to this parcel of land. "Carter believes he has won one entry rid, but this land holds secrets he will never possess. The water that flows beneath this soil is not just a resource to be exploited, it is the lifeblood of the entire watershed. I may have lost my company, my reputation, and nearly my sanity, but I will not surrender this last piece of earth to his greed. Some battles cannot be won in courtrooms or boardrooms. Some must be fought with patience, with time, with the quiet persistence of truth against deception." Eleanor looked up from the journal to find Lucas watching her, his expression respectful but curious. "My grandfather wasn't retreating when he came here," she said softly. "He was making a stand, the only kind he could still make." "Like someone else I know," Lucas replied. Eleanor didn't answer, returning instead to the journal. The final entries documented Richard's discovery of the aquifer, his efforts to map it, and his growing certainty that William Carter knew about it and wanted it for himself. "The water flows pure here, filtered through limestone and ancient glacial deposits. In a world where clean water becomes increasingly precious, this aquifer will be worth more than gold. Carter will come for it, if not him, then his son after him. I have made arrangements for this property to pass to my blood, with the hope that whoever inherits will understand what must be protected here." The last entry, dated just days before Richard's death, was brief but resolute. "I have done what I can to preserve this place. The rest will be up to those who come after me. May they find the strength I could not." Eleanor closed the journal, a complex mix of emotions washing through her. She had come to this shed believing she was running away from her career, from her grief over Sarah, from a world that demanded compromises she couldn't make. But perhaps she had been running towards something instead, toward a legacy she hadn't known existed, toward a battle that had been waiting for her to take up its standard. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had deliberately maintained the shed's dilapidated exterior to keep people away, to signal poverty and insignificance, exactly as her grandfather had done. Without knowing it, she had followed in his footsteps, using the same strategy of calculated deception to protect what mattered. Lucas had been quiet, giving her space to absorb the journal's revelations. Now he spoke, his voice gentle but direct. "What will you do, Eleanor?" It was the essential question, the one she had been avoiding since Maxwell Carter's first visit. The easiest path would be to sell, to take the money and disappear to some other remote location, to start again with her solitude intact. But that would mean surrendering the aquifer to exploitation, betraying her grandfather's trust, and abandoning the sanctuary she had built with her own hands. Before she could answer, her phone chimed with a notification, an unusual occurrence given how rarely she used it. Eleanor picked it up, frowning at the screen. "What is it?" Lucas asked, noting her expression. "An email from someone named Jasper Quinn at the Phoenix Craft Gallery." She scrolled through the message, her frown deepening. "Someone has been posting photos of my work online, not the pieces I sell through the gallery, but my private collection here. Photos from inside my home." Lucas moved closer, concerned. "May I see?" Eleanor turned the phone so he could view the images, high-quality photographs of her pottery, her furniture, the interior of her shed. The knot in her stomach tightened as she recognized the angle, the composition. "These are yours," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You took these after I explicitly told you not to photograph my home." Lucas stared at the images, genuine shock on his face. "Eleanor, I swear I didn't take these. The one photo I did take of the exterior during the storm I deleted when you objected. These aren't mine." "Then how do you explain them? They're clearly professional quality, taken yesterday during the storm." Lucas studied the images more carefully, his expression changing from shock to grim understanding. "They're Rebecca's," he said finally. "The angles, the focus on details rather than the whole. This is her style. She must have taken them while we were checking on my car." Eleanor felt the betrayal like a physical blow. She had allowed these people into her space, had begun to lower her carefully constructed barriers. And this was the result: her privacy violated, her sanctuary exposed to the world. "I trusted you," she said, the words emerging as barely more than a whisper. "Both of you." "Eleanor, I had no idea she was doing this," Lucas insisted. "This goes against everything I believe about respecting subjects' boundaries. I'll talk to her, make her take down the photos." "It's too late," Eleanor cut him off, scrolling through her other notifications. "The images have already been shared thousands of times. There are articles appearing online. The secret life of Phoenix Craft reclusive artist's hidden home revealed. Someone linked my real name to my professional pseudonym." The full implications hit her like a tidal wave. Her carefully maintained anonymity, the protective barrier between her art and her life, had been shattered. The world now knew who E.H. was, where she lived, what her home looked like inside. The sanctuary she had built was exposed, its secrets laid bare for public consumption. "You need to leave," she told Lucas, her voice flat. "Now." "Eleanor, please. Let me help fix this. I can talk to Rebecca, to the gallery." "Leave." The word exploded from her, raw with hurt and betrayal. "You've done enough, all of you. Just, Lucas hesitated, clearly torn between respecting her wishes and trying to make amends. Finally, he nodded, gathering his camera bag. "For what it's worth, I'm truly sorry this happened. Not just for Rebecca's actions, but for my part in bringing her here. You deserve better." Eleanor didn't respond her back to him as she stared out the window. She heard him sigh, heard the door open and close as he departed. Only when she was certain he was gone did she allow herself to feel the full force of her emotions: anger, betrayal, fear, and underneath it all, a profound sense of loss. The phone in her hand continued to buzz with notifications as the story spread. Eleanor threw it across the room, watching with grim satisfaction as it hit the wall and clattered to the floor. The momentary release of tension quickly gave way to a cold, hard realization: her life had been irrevocably changed. The walls she had built, both physical and metaphorical, had been breached. She moved to her pottery wheel, needing the grounding ritual of clay beneath her hands, the centering focus of creation. But as she sat and reached for a fresh block of clay, she found herself frozen, unable to begin. For the first time in 5 years, her hands failed her. With a cry of frustration that rose from some deep wounded place within her, Eleanor swept her arm across the nearby shelf, sending unfinished pieces crashing to the floor. The destruction continued, a whirlwind of rage carrying her through her studio, upending containers of glaze, smashing works in progress, tearing sketches from the walls. When it was over, she stood amid the wreckage, breathing hard, hands bleeding from where she had cut them on broken pottery. The devastation around her mirrored the chaos within her. Sanctuary violated her defenses, breached her carefully constructed life, exposed to the very world she had retreated from. As the adrenaline faded, leaving her shaking and spent, Eleanor sank to the floor among the shards of her work. The journal her grandfather had kept lay nearby, somehow untouched by her destructive passage. Its worn cover seemed to watch her patient and knowing, waiting for her to remember what she was fighting for. Some battles cannot be won in courtrooms or boardrooms. Some must be fought with patience, with time, with the quiet persistence of truth against deception. Eleanor reached for the journal, holding it against her chest as tears finally came, not just for the privacy she had lost today, but for Sarah, for the career she had abandoned, for the grandfather she had never known, for all the connections she had severed in her quest for solitude. Outside, the storm clouds were finally breaking, thin shafts of sunlight piercing the gray canopy. Eleanor watched as the light gradually transformed her shed, in illuminating the destruction she had wrought, but also revealing what remained intact, the structure itself, the systems she had built, the foundation that still held firm. The revelation came slowly then, with gathering certainty she could rebuild. She had done it before, transformed a dilapidated shed into a sanctuary, shaped a new identity from the ruins of the old. She could do it again, though perhaps not in the same way. Perhaps this time the rebuilding would require not just physical labor, but a different kind of courage, the courage to engage rather than withdraw, to stand and fight rather than hide. Eleanor rose from the floor, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. She retrieved her phone, ignoring the continuing notifications, and found the business card Maxwell Carter had left. She stared at it for a long moment, weighing options, considering paths forward. Then, with deliberate movements, she tore the card in half and dropped the pieces into a recycling bin. If there was to be a battle for this land, for the water beneath it, for her grandfather's legacy and her own future, she would fight it on her terms, not Maxwell Carter's, not Westridge Development's. The shed around her was in disarray, her artwork in ruins, her privacy shattered. But as she stood amid the wreckage, Eleanor Hayes felt something unexpected taking root within her, a fierce determination that transcended anger, a clarity of purpose that cut through her fear. She had inherited more than land from Richard Hayes. She had inherited his fight, and unlike him, she would not stand alone. The following days brought a flurry of activity unlike anything Eleanor had experienced in her 5 years of isolation. The story of Phoenix Craft's true identity had spread like wildfire through art circles and social media, bringing a stream of uninvited attention. Journalists called her rarely used phone. Art collectors sent emails inquiring about private viewings. Curious locals drove slowly past her property, hoping for a glimpse of the woman who had lived among them as a mystery for years. Eleanor dealt with the intrusion by not dealing with it at all. She didn't answer calls, didn't respond to emails, didn't acknowledge the cars that slowed on the road past her land. Instead, she threw herself into cleaning up the destruction she had wrought in her studio, methodically sweeping up broken pottery, salvaging what materials she could, restoring order to her space, if not to her life. The third morning after the photos had appeared online, Eleanor was startled by a knock at her door. She opened it cautiously to find Rebecca Chen standing there, a folder tucked under her arm, her expression a complex mixture of determination and contrition. "You have a lot of nerve showing up here," Eleanor said, making no move to invite her in. Rebecca nodded. "I know. What I did was unforgivable. I violated your privacy and broke your trust. I can offer explanations, but not excuses." "I'm not interested in either." Rebecca seemed to have expected this response. "That's fair, but I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here because I've been working on something you need to see." She held out the folder. "Information about Maxwell Carter and Westridge that changes everything." Eleanor didn't take the folder, suspicion evident in her stance. Why should I trust anything from you? You shouldn't, Rebecca admitted. But this isn't about me. It's about the aquifer under your property and what Westridge plans to do with it. At the mention of the aquifer, Eleanor's resolve wavered. Despite her anger at Rebecca, she couldn't ignore information that might be crucial to protecting her land. Reluctantly, she stepped back, allowing the journalist to enter. Rebecca took in the partially restored studio area, noting the absence of many pieces that had been visible during her previous visit. "I'm sorry about your work," she said quietly. Eleanor ignored the comment, gesturing for Rebecca to get to the point. The journalist opened her folder and spread several documents across the table. "After the storm, I continued my investigation into Westridge. Their offer to help with town recovery got me digging deeper into their finances." She pointed to a complex diagram of corporate entities. "Westridge Development is just the public face. Behind it is a web of shell companies, all leading back to Carter Holdings. William Carter's original company," Eleanor said, recognizing the name from her grandfather's journal. Rebecca nodded. "Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. 3 months ago, Carter Holdings established a new subsidiary called Pure Source Beverages. They've been quietly buying water rights throughout the region. For bottled water production," Eleanor concluded, "just as my grandfather suspected." "Yes, but it's worse than that." Rebecca pulled out another document, this one bearing an official-looking seal. "This is from the EPA's regional office. It details containment failures at 3 previous Westridge projects, chemical leaching into groundwater from improperly lined retention or illegal discharge of treatment chemicals into watersheds." Eleanor studied the document, her architect's eye picking out the technical details that would escape most readers. They cut corners on environmental protections. "Systematically," Rebecca confirmed, "and they've been covering it up with payoffs to local officials, manipulated water quality reports, and aggressive legal tactics against whistleblowers." She hesitated before adding, "including your grandfather." Eleanor looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "Richard Hayes filed complaints about William Carter's practices with the State Environmental Board in 1987. 3 months later, the board dismissed his claims without investigation. I found evidence that 2 board members received consulting contracts with Carter Holdings the following year." The revelation sent a jolt through Eleanor. Her grandfather hadn't just been fighting for his company or his land, he had been trying to expose genuine environmental corruption. And he had been silenced. "There's more," Rebecca continued, pulling out a map that looked disturbingly familiar. "This was in Westridge's confidential project files. It shows the aquifer under your property and their plans for it." Eleanor examined the map, which was a more recent and detailed version of the one in her grandfather's box. What she saw made her blood run cold. The plans didn't just show water extraction, they showed a processing facility that would use chemical treatments to increase output with drainage systems that would funnel waste directly into the watershed that fed the river system miles away. "They're not just planning to bottle the water," she said, understanding dawning. "They're planning to drain the aquifer as quickly as possible with no regard for the environmental impact." Rebecca nodded grimly. "The market research in their files suggests they expect the aquifer to be commercially depleted within 7 years. After that, they'll sell the contaminated land to another subsidiary for tax purposes and move on." Eleanor felt sick. The aquifer her grandfather had protected wasn't just a valuable resource. It was a vital part of the region's ecosystem, one that Westridge planned to destroy for short-term profit. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked, still not trusting Rebecca's motives. "Why not just publish it?" "2 reasons," Rebecca replied. "First, because I owe you this information after what I did. And second, because I can't publish it yet. These documents were obtained, not entirely legally. I need corroborating evidence from legitimate sources before I can use them. And you think I can help with that? I think you're the only one who can. Your grandfather's documentation, combined with your professional expertise as an architect, could provide the legal foundation needed to challenge Westridge's environmental impact statements." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, absorbing the implications. To help Rebecca would mean stepping fully into the public eye, becoming not just the exposed artist Phoenix Craft, but an active opponent of a powerful corporation. It would mean abandoning what remained of her privacy of the solitary life she had built. "I need time to think," she finally said. Rebecca gathered her documents. "Of course, but not too much time. The town council is voting on Westridge's proposal in 3 days. She paused at the door. For what it's worth, I am truly sorry about the photographs. It was wrong professionally and personally. I got caught up in what I thought was a good story and forgot that real people's lives were at stake. After she had gone, Eleanor sat at her table surrounded by the remnants of her grandfather's documents and Rebecca's revelations. The parallels between their situations were impossible to ignore, both investigating the Carter family's environmental misdeeds, both gathering evidence that might never see the light of day, both fighting a battle that seemed impossibly stacked against them. But there was one crucial difference: Richard Hayes had fought alone. Eleanor had potential allies. Rebecca with her investigative skills, Martha with her knowledge of local history, perhaps even some of the townspeople who had come to her door offering help after the storm. And Lucas. The thought of him brought a pang of mingled anger and regret. He had seemed genuinely shocked by Rebecca's betrayal, genuinely sorry for his role in bringing her to Eleanor's sanctuary. But could she trust that reaction? Could she trust anyone after what had happened? As if summoned by her thoughts, a gentle knock sounded at her door. Eleanor opened it to find Lucas standing there, his expression serious, his camera conspicuously absent. "Before you close the door in my face," he said quickly, "I need you to know that I had nothing to do with those photos. I would never violate someone's trust that way." Eleanor didn't invite him in, but she didn't close the door either. Rebecca was just here. Surprise flickered across his face. What did she want? To share information about Westridge and to apologize. "Did you accept the apology, I mean?" Eleanor shook her head. Some betrayals can't be undone with the words. Lucas nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know. That's why I'm not here to apologize again. I'm here to offer something more concrete." He held out a flash drive. "I've been documenting Westridge's projects for over a year. Environmental impact, community disruption, the whole pattern. It's all here, in interviews, photographs, data. If you decide to fight them, this might help." Eleanor hesitated before taking the drive. "Why would you give me this?" "Because what they're doing is wrong, because your grandfather tried to stop them once and couldn't, because you shouldn't have to face this alone." He paused, then added more quietly, "And because I believe in what you've built here, not just the physical space, but the principle of it, the right to define your own relationship with the world on your own terms." Eleanor studied him, trying to gauge his sincerity. Despite her wariness, something in his steady gaze reassured her. "Thank you," she said finally. "I'll look at it." He nodded, seemingly understanding that this was as much of an olive branch as she could offer right now. "Whatever you decide to do, Eleanor, know that there are people who will stand with you. You don't have to choose between total isolation and total exposure. There's middle ground." After he had gone, Eleanor plugged the flash drive into her laptop, half expecting to find it empty or filled with meaningless files. Instead, she discovered a meticulously organized archive of Westridge's activities across 3 states, drone footage of environmental damage, interviews with affected residents, financial analyses showing the gap between promised community benefits and actual outcomes. The evidence was damning, and it aligned perfectly with what Rebecca had shown her and what her grandfather had documented decades earlier. The Carter family's business model hadn't changed, only the scale had grown. As she reviewed the files, Eleanor's phone chimed with yet another notification. She was about to ignore it when she saw that it was from Martha. The message was brief but urgent. "Town Council moved up vote on Westridge proposal. Meeting tomorrow at 3 p.m. Maxwell Carter arrived with lawyers. Need to talk. Coming over." Eleanor set down her phone, a cold certainty settling over her. Maxwell was accelerating his timeline, probably in response to the unwanted attention her sudden fame had brought to the project. He was moving to secure approval before any organized opposition could form. The pieces were aligning with terrible clarity: her grandfather's legacy, the aquifer beneath her land, Westridge's destructive plans, her own accidental public exposure, and now the rushed council vote. It was as if events were conspiring to force her hand, to push her from the shadows into the light. Eleanor stood at the center of her shed, surrounded by the life she had built and the history she had inherited. For 5 years, she had maintained the illusion of poverty and insignificance to keep the world at bay. Now that illusion was shattered, and she faced a choice: retreat further, perhaps sell the land and disappear to some new isolation, or step forward and engage with the battle that had found her, despite her best efforts to avoid it. Outside, the afternoon sun illuminated her property, the light catching on puddles left by the storm, turning them momentarily to gold. In the distance, she could see Martha's car approaching, bringing with it the inevitable moment of decision. Eleanor took a deep breath and opened her door, stepping outside to meet whatever came next. The time for hiding was over. Like her grandfather before her, she would make her stand, but unlike him, she would not stand alone. Martha's weathered pickup truck rolled to a stop in front of Eleanor's shed, sending gravel skittering beneath its tires. The elderly woman emerged with surprising agility, a thick folder tucked under one arm, and determination etched into the lines of her face. Eleanor met her at the door, the decision to engage already solidifying in her mind. "They've moved up the vote," Martha said without preamble as she stepped inside. Maxwell Carter arrived at Town Hall this morning with 2 lawyers and a revised proposal. Mayor Johnson called an emergency session for tomorrow afternoon. Eleanor nodded unsurprised. "He's trying to push it through before opposition can form." "Exactly." Martha set her folder on the table into the growing collection of documents. "But he doesn't know what we have. What you have." Eleanor gestured to her laptop where Lucas's files were still open. Evidence of Westridge's environmental violations in 3 states. Rebecca brought similar documentation earlier today. Martha's eyebrows rose. "Rebecca Chen, the journalist who exposed you." "The same." Eleanor's voice was flat. "Apparently she has a conscience, even if her timing leaves something to be desired." "Well, well," Martha murmured. "Allies come from unexpected places." She opened her folder, revealing town records, property maps, and what appeared to be handwritten notes spanning decades. "I've been the town clerk's assistant for 30 years. Official records only tell part of the story. These are my personal notes about every development project proposed in Oakridge since 1985. Eleanor leaned closer, recognizing the value of such meticulous documentation. "Including my grandfather's battles with William Carter." "Including everything," Martha confirmed. "The backroom deals, the officials who suddenly changed their votes after private meetings, the properties that mysteriously changed hands just before zoning decisions. I never had enough to prove wrongdoing, but I kept recording it all, hoping someday it would matter." "Today it matters," Eleanor said quietly. Martha nodded, her eyes bright with vindication. "So you've decided to fight," instead of answering directly. Eleanor moved to her workbench and picked up a shard of pottery, one of the few pieces that had survived her destructive outburst. It was a fragment of a bowl she'd created during her first year in the shed, imperfect, but meaningful, a tangible marker of her journey. "5 years ago, I came here believing I was running away," she said, turning the shard in her fingers. "From my career, from my guilt over Sarah, from a world that demanded compromises I couldn't make. But I see now that I was also running towards something, this land, this legacy, this fight. Without knowing it, I've been preparing for this moment since I arrived." Martha's expression softened. "Richard would be proud." "I hope so." Eleanor set down the pottery shard with gentle reverence. "But I can't do this alone. I need help from you, from Lucas, even from Rebecca. And I need to understand exactly what we're up against." Martha spread out a town zoning map, her finger tracing the boundaries of Eleanor's property and the surrounding land. "Westridge has acquired everything within the dotted line. Your parcel is the missing piece in their puzzle. And without it, they'd need to completely redesign the project. The aquifer extends beyond your property, but the optimal access point is here." Martha tapped a spot near the center of Eleanor's land. "Their entire water bottling operation depends on this location." Eleanor studied the map, her architectural training allowing her to see the project as Carter had designed it. "They've intentionally placed high-impact elements at the boundaries of my property. If I resist, they'll claim I'm preventing them from implementing proper environmental controls." "A deliberate pressure tactic," Martha agreed, "and they've sweetened the deal for the town." The revised proposal includes funding for a new community center, road improvements, and a tax structure that promises significant revenue. "All contingent on acquiring my land." "All of it." Martha straightened, wincing slightly as her back protested. "The council meeting is at 3 tomorrow. If you're going to make a stand, that's where it needs to happen." Eleanor nodded, the timeline suddenly concrete. Less than 24 hours to prepare for a battle that had been brewing for decades. "I'll be there." After Martha departed, promising to gather additional support from longtime residents who remembered Richard Hayes, Eleanor was left alone with the weight of her decision. The shed that had been her sanctuary now felt like a war room. Documents spread across every surface, the ghosts of the past mingling with the threats of the present. She picked up her phone, hesitating only briefly before dialing Lucas's number. He answered on the first ring as if he'd been waiting for her call. "I'm fighting," she said without introduction. "The town council is voting on the Westridge proposal tomorrow at 3. I could use an ally." She could hear the smile in his voice. "Just tell me what you need." Eleanor took a deep breath. "I need you to document everything. Bring your camera, record the meeting, and I need photographs of what I'm about to do. Which is, I'm going to transform my home. One last time." After ending the call, Eleanor surveyed her space with a critical eye. For 5 years, she had maintained the illusion of poverty and neglect on the exterior while creating beauty and function within. Now she would invert that strategy, revealing the truth to the world on her own terms. She worked through the night, fueled by purpose and strong coffee. First, she carefully packed her most valuable and personal possessions, securing them in waterproof containers. Then she began the transformation. Using the supplies the townspeople had brought after the storm, she reinforced the shed's structure from the inside, ensuring it could withstand what she planned. She moved her pottery wheel and kiln to the center of the space, clearing the surrounding area. From her storage cabinets, she retrieved special materials she had collected but never used: pigments that glowed under different light conditions, metallic compounds that would oxidize in specific patterns when exposed to the elements, sealants that would preserve rather than conceal the shed's weathered character. When Lucas arrived shortly after dawn, camera in hand, Eleanor had been working for nearly 12 hours straight. Her hands were stained with pigments, her clothes spattered with sealant, but her eyes were clear and focused. "You look like a warrior preparing for battle," Lucas observed as he took in the transformed space. "In a way, I am." Eleanor gestured to the exterior walls. "I need you to document this, every step." Lucas nodded, understanding instinctively what she intended. "I'll start with before shots." While he photographed the shed's exterior from multiple angles, Eleanor continued her preparations. By mid-morning, she was ready for the final phase. She mixed special clay slips and pigments in large buckets, testing their consistency with practiced hands. "Ready?" she asked when Lucas returned. "Ready for what exactly?" Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from her. "For me to turn this shed into a statement." She began with the interior walls, applying washes of color that highlighted rather than concealed the wood's grain and age. Blues that evoked water flowing beneath the earth, greens that spoke of growth and renewal, earth tones that anchored the structure to the land it protected. She worked with the precision and vision of the architect she had been and the artist she had become, each brushstroke deliberate, each color choice meaningful. Lucas documented her process silently, understanding that he was witnessing something profound, not just the transformation of a building, but the emergence of a woman who had hidden herself for too long. As noon approached, Eleanor moved to the exterior. Starting at the roof and working downwards, she applied her special mixtures to the weathered boards. Unlike traditional paint, these compounds didn't mask the shed's character, but enhanced it, bringing out the textures, emphasizing the history written in every crack and nail hole, adding subtle iridescence that would change with the light and weather. "It's not about making it look new," she explained as Lucas captured her work. "It's about revealing its true nature, its purpose, its value." By early afternoon, the transformation was complete. The shed no longer appeared dilapidated or neglected. Instead, it stood as a deliberate, artistic statement, a structure that honored its past while asserting its importance to the future. From certain angles in specific light, one could see patterns emerging in the pigments, subtle representations of water flowing underground, of root systems, spreading of the interconnection between the built environment and the natural world. Eleanor stepped back, surveying her work with critical eyes. "It's time to get cleaned up. We have a council meeting to attend." As she washed away the pigments from her hands and changed into clean clothes, Eleanor felt a strange calm settling over her. The panic and rage that had consumed her after the exposure of her identity had transformed into something else, a clear-eyed determination, a certainty of purpose that transcended fear. She chose her outfit carefully: dark jeans, a crisp white shirt, and a tailored jacket she hadn't worn since leaving New York. Professional but not corporate, confident but not imposing. Her own person, not a character in someone else's narrative. When they arrived at the town hall, the parking lot was already filled beyond capacity. Word of the meeting had spread throughout Oakridge, drawing a crowd that spilled onto the building steps. Eleanor recognized faces from the hardware store, the diner neighbors who had barely acknowledged her existence for 5 years. Martha waited by the entrance, a small army of elderly residents gathered around her. Richard's contemporaries, she explained as Eleanor approached. People who remember what William Carter did, who respect what your grandfather stood for. Inside the council chamber was packed to capacity. Mayor Johnson sat at the center of the dais, flanked by 4 council members. To one side, Maxwell Carter and his legal team occupied a reserved table, their matching suits and leather portfolios projecting corporate confidence. Eleanor felt eyes tracking her as she moved through the crowd. The whispers followed. That's her, the artist, Hayes's granddaughter. For the first time in years, she didn't flinch from the attention. Instead, she met it directly, nodding to those she recognized, allowing herself to be seen. She spotted Rebecca near the front, notebook in hand, her expression brightening with surprise when she saw Eleanor. The journalist gestured subtly to an empty chair beside her, but Eleanor shook her head. She had a different position in mind. Mayor Johnson called the meeting to order, his gavel barely cutting through the buzz of conversation. Citizens of Oakridge were here today to vote on the West Ridge development proposal, which has been revised to include substantial community benefits. He nodded to Maxwell, who rose smoothly, buttoning his expensive jacket with practiced ease. Thank you, Mayor. As you all know, the Oakridge Revival Project represents a unique opportunity for this community: jobs, tax revenue, infrastructure improvements, and a restored environmental footprint. Eleanor listened as Maxwell outlined the proposal, noting how skillfully he emphasized benefits while glossing over impacts. His presentation was polished, professional, and entirely misleading, exactly what she would have expected from William Carter's son. In conclusion, Maxwell said, after 20 minutes of carefully crafted propaganda, we're prepared to begin construction immediately following approval, with completion in 18 months. Oakridge will be transformed from a struggling rural community to a destination for ecotourism and sustainable living. Applause followed, though Eleanor noted it came primarily from the front rows where Westridge had positioned supporters. The longer-term residents remained silent, their expressions skeptical. Mayor Johnson nodded appreciatively. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Before we move to discussion and vote, are there any public comments? Please keep them brief and relevant. Eleanor rose from her seat, acutely aware of the eyes that followed her movement. She made her way to the podium, setting a folder of documents on its surface. The microphone whined briefly as she adjusted it. My name is Eleanor Hayes, she began, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. I am a licensed architect, a professional artist, and the owner of the property that Westridge Development needs to complete their project. A murmur ran through the crowd. Maxwell's expression remained neutral, but she caught the slight tightening at the corners of his mouth. I am also the granddaughter of Richard Hayes, who once stood in this same room to warn against the environmental damage proposed by William Carter's developments. He was ignored then. I hope you will not make the same mistake today. Eleanor opened her folder, retrieving a large map that she unfolded on the podium. This is a geological survey of the aquifer that runs beneath my property and extends throughout the eastern portion of Oakridge. It is one of the purest groundwater sources in the region, feeding the river system that supports agriculture and wildlife for miles downstream. She pointed to specific notations on the map. Westridge's proposal includes a water bottling facility positioned directly over the optimal access point to this aquifer. Their environmental impact statement claims sustainable usage, but their internal documents tell a different story. Maxwell rose immediately. Mayor, I object to this presentation. Ms. Hayes has no standing to present alleged internal documents that were not properly obtained. Eleanor faced him directly. These documents were compiled by my grandfather over decades of monitoring Carter Holdings' activities. They are his personal research, legally obtained and legally mine to present. Before Maxwell could respond, Martha stood from her seat. As town clerk's assistant for 30 years, I can verify that these documents align with official records I've maintained. Richard Hayes filed numerous environmental concerns that were systematically dismissed without proper investigation. The mayor looked uncomfortable, clearly caught between Westridge's influence and the unexpected opposition. Ms. Hayes, please continue, but keep to verifiable facts. Eleanor nodded, turning to face the audience directly. The verifiable facts are these West Ridge development is not proposing an eco-resort. They are proposing a water extraction operation disguised as environmental stewardship. Their subsidiary Pure Source Beverages plans to drain the aquifer within 7 years, leaving behind contaminated land and a depleted watershed. She retrieved more documents from her folder, holding them up for the council to see. These are EPA reports documenting similar operations by West Ridge in Montana, Oregon, and Michigan. In each case, they promised sustainable development and delivered environmental degradation. Maxwell stood again, his composure slipping. Mayor Johnson, this is outrageous. Ms. Hayes is making unfounded accusations that have nothing to do with the Oakridge proposal. On the contrary, Eleanor countered, they have everything to do with it. The same pattern is evident in your current plans, the same technical specifications for extraction equipment, the same questionable water quality monitoring systems, the same discharge protocols that have resulted in contamination elsewhere. She turned to face Maxwell directly. Your father tried to steal this aquifer from my grandfather 40 years ago. Now you're trying to steal it from me and from every resident of Oakridge who depends on clean water. The room had fallen silent, the audience captivated by the confrontation unfolding before them. Eleanor could feel the momentum shifting, the carefully constructed narrative of West Ridge as community savior beginning to crumble. I am not opposed to development, she continued, returning her attention to the council. I am opposed to exploitation disguised as progress. As a licensed architect with expertise in sustainable design, I believe Oakridge deserves better than what West Ridge is offering. She pulled out one final document, a sketch she had created during the night working from her grandfather's original concepts. This is an alternative vision for development, one that truly honors the principles of sustainability, that creates genuine long-term employment, that protects the aquifer while still allowing the community to benefit from it. The sketch showed a different kind of project, smaller in scale, integrated with the natural landscape designed to enhance rather than exploit the local environment. At its center was a community-owned spring water cooperative rather than a corporate bottling plant. I am prepared to donate a portion of my land for this alternative development, Eleanor stated, her voice clear and unwavering, with the condition that the aquifer remains under community control, protected by binding legal covenants that prevent its exploitation. The crowd erupted in murmurs and exclamations. Maxwell's face had darkened, his legal team leaning in to whisper urgent consultations. Mayor Johnson banged his gavel repeatedly, struggling to restore order. So, Hayes, he said, when the noise had subsided somewhat, while we appreciate your alternative perspective, West Ridge has already invested considerable resources in their proposal. The town council has reviewed their plans extensively. Have you reviewed their environmental compliance history? Eleanor challenged. Have you seen the documentation of watershed contamination at their Montana facility? Have you investigated Pure Source Beverages and its connection to Carter Holdings? Before the mayor could respond, Jim Rollins stood from his seat near the back. Still using one of the crutches Eleanor had made him, he made his way to the center aisle. Mayor Johnson, as town maintenance supervisor, I've been monitoring our water quality for 15 years. Ms. Hayes saved my life during the storm. The least I can do is confirm that her concerns about the aquifer are legitimate. Our testing shows it connects directly to the municipal water supply. If it's contaminated, we all suffer. Thomas Lee from the diner rose next. My family has run the diner for 3 generations. We survived the factory closing because we own our building outright. How many of these promised West Ridge jobs will pay enough to support a family? How many will still exist once the bottling operation depletes the aquifer? One by one, residents stood to voice concerns, question support for Eleanor's alternative vision. The carefully orchestrated meeting was transforming into something Maxwell Carter clearly hadn't anticipated: genuine community engagement. Eleanor watched as the polished veneer of corporate confidence began to crack. Maxwell whispered urgently to his legal team, their expressions growing increasingly concerned as more residents spoke against the proposal. When the public comment period finally ended, Mayor Johnson looked distinctly uncomfortable. In light of the unexpected information presented today, I believe it would be prudent to postpone the vote on the West Ridge proposal until these concerns can be properly addressed. Maxwell rose immediately. Mayor, with all due respect, West Ridge has fulfilled every requirement for approval. This delay tactic is clearly orchestrated by Miss Hayes to obstruct legitimate development. It's not a delay tactic, Mr. Carter, Eleanor replied, still standing at the podium. It's due diligence. The same due diligence your father avoided 40 years ago when he manipulated the system to bypass environmental regulations. Maxwell's professional mask slipped entirely, anger flashing in his eyes. You have no idea what you're talking about. My father built a legitimate business while your grandfather retreated to a shed to nurse conspiracy theories. The attack was exactly what Eleanor had been waiting for, an emotional response that revealed the personal nature of this confrontation. My grandfather documented everything, Mr. Carter. Every falsified environmental report, every bribed official, every shell company created to hide liability. He couldn't stop your father then, but he made sure someone could stop you now. Martha stood again, her voice carrying surprising strength. I move that the council table the West Ridge proposal pending an independent environmental review and investigation of the concerns raised today. Jim Rollins seconded the motion immediately. Mayor Johnson looked trapped, his gaze darting between Maxwell's thunderous expression and the of determined faces in the audience. The motion has been made and seconded. Council members, please cast your votes. The vote was 3-2 in favor of postponement, a narrow margin but sufficient. Maxwell gathered his documents with barely controlled fury, his legal team already on phones, presumably calling higher authorities to intervene. As the meeting adjourned in a buzz of excited conversation, Eleanor found herself surrounded by townspeople, some offering congratulations, others asking questions about her alternative proposal, many simply introducing themselves properly for the first time in 5 years. Through the crowd, she caught sight of Lucas at the back of the room, camera still in hand, a smile of quiet pride on his face. Rebecca stood nearby, scribbling furiously in her notebook, occasionally glancing up to meet Eleanor's gaze with a mixture of admiration and lingering remorse. Martha made her way to Eleanor's side, taking her arm with familiar affection. You did it, girl. First round, anyway. First round, Eleanor agreed. Maxwell won't give up easily. Neither will we, Martha said firmly. The truth is out now, and that changes everything. As they moved toward the exit, Maxwell intercepted them, his composure partially restored, but anger still evident in the tightness around his eyes. This isn't over, Ms. Hayes, not by a long shot. Westridge has the resources to pursue this project for years if necessary. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. I'm counting on it, Mr. Carter, because every day this fight continues is another day for people to learn what your company really does to the communities it claims to help. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You're making a mistake. I could have made you wealthy beyond imagination. Now you'll be lucky if you don't lose everything in legal fees. Some things are worth more than money, Eleanor replied. My grandfather understood that. Maybe someday you will too. She left him standing there, moving through the crowd with a new sense of purpose. The battle was far from over. Maxwell would regroup, bring in more lawyers, apply pressure through different channels. But for the first time since discovering her grandfather's legacy, Eleanor felt equal to the challenge. Outside the town hall, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the town square. Eleanor paused on the steps, taking in the scene. Ordinary people engaged in animated conversation, the energy of genuine community participation electrifying the air. Lucas approached camera, lowered respectfully. You were incredible in there. Eleanor allowed herself a small smile. I was terrified. Couldn't tell. He gestured to his camera. I documented everything just as you asked. The transformation of the shed, the meeting, all of it. Thank you. She hesitated, then added, would you be willing to document what comes next as well? What does come next? Eleanor looked out over the town that had been her reluctant home for 5 years. I'm going to finish what my grandfather started. Not just stopping Westridge, but creating a real alternative, the sustainable community he envisioned built around protecting the aquifer rather than exploiting it. Lucas studied her with quiet appreciation. From recluse to community organizer, quite a journey. I'm still figuring it out, she admitted. The balance between privacy and engagement, between protecting what's mine and sharing what matters. But I'm done hiding. As if to emphasize her point, Sarah Jenkins from the hardware store approached several other business owners in tow. Ms. Hayes Eleanor, we've been talking about your alternative proposal. If you're serious about community ownership, we'd like to be involved. Many of us have skills resources we could contribute. Eleanor found herself nodding, the concept of collaboration still foreign, but increasingly appealing. I'd like that. Perhaps we could meet at my place tomorrow. I have plenty of space for a planning session. The words surprised her even as she spoke them, the invitation to bring others into her sanctuary not as emergency shelter, but as welcomed guests. Yet it felt right, a natural evolution, rather than a betrayal of her principles. As the impromptu planning group dispersed, Rebecca approached cautiously, keeping a respectful distance. "That was journalism gold in there," she said. "Maxwell Carter publicly exposed the town, rallying behind the underdog. My editor is ecstatic." Eleanor regarded her with measured neutrality. "I'm glad it makes a good story." Rebecca winced at the coolness in her tone. "I deserve that. But for what it's worth, the story I'm writing now is the one that should have been told from the beginning, about corporate environmental abuse and the courage it takes to stand against it. Not about invading someone's privacy for clicks." She held out a business card. "If you ever want to tell your story, your grandfather's story, on your own terms, I'd be honored to help. No hidden cameras, no betrayals, just the truth as you choose to share it." Eleanor hesitated before taking the card, neither accepting nor rejecting the olive branch outright. "I'll think about it." As the crowd gradually dispersed, Eleanor found herself standing alone with Martha, watching the sunset paint the town in warm golden light. "What would he think of all this?" she asked quietly. "My grandfather. Would he approve of what I'm doing?" Martha smiled, lines crinkling around her eyes. "Richard was a fighter, but he was also a builder. He didn't just oppose bad development, he championed good development. That's what made him special." She patted Eleanor's hand. "And that's what you're doing now. Not just saying no to Westridge, but saying yes to something better." They walked together toward the parking lot where Lucas waited by his car. The day's events had forged connections that Eleanor had never expected to make with the town, with her grandfather's legacy, with people who might become allies or even friends. "Ready to head home?" Lucas asked as they approached. Home. The word resonated differently now. Not just a sanctuary to hide within, but a base from which to engage with the world on her own terms. Eleanor nodded, suddenly eager to return to the transformed shed to see how the special pigments she had applied were responding to the evening light. "I have planning to do," she said, "for tomorrow's meeting, for the community project, for—" she hesitated, then finished simply, "for what comes next." The drive back to Eleanor's property was quiet, each of them absorbed in their own thoughts. As they crested the final hill, the shed came into view, and Eleanor felt her breath catch. In the golden light of sunset, the structure she had transformed that morning had become something magical. The special pigments responded to the changing light, creating an iridescent effect that made the building appear to glow from within. The patterns she had incorporated, suggesting flowing water root systems, the interconnection of built and natural environments, were subtly visible, revealing themselves only to those who knew to look. It was still her shed, weathered, imperfect, bearing the marks of storms weathered and years past. But now it stood as a deliberate statement rather than a disguise. Like Eleanor herself, it had emerged from hiding to declare its true purpose and value. Lucas slowed the car, clearly struck by the sight. "It's beautiful," he said simply. "It's honest," Eleanor replied. "Finally." As they approached, she could see that someone had been there during her absence. A small package sat on her doorstep, wrapped in plain brown paper. Eleanor picked it up cautiously, finding no name or note attached. Inside was a small wooden box, similar in craftsmanship to the one Martha had brought, containing her grandfather's journal. When she opened it, she found a single item inside, a brass key on an old leather cord, green with age. "What is it?" Lucas asked. Eleanor turned the key in her fingers, recognition dawning. "It's the key to the original Carter and Hayes design office. My grandfather kept it all these years, even after William Carter locked him out and stole the company. Who would have left it?" Eleanor thought of Maxwell's expression as he left the town hall, the mixture of anger and something else, perhaps uncertainty, perhaps the first crack in a lifetime of believing his father's version of events. "Someone who might be beginning to question their own legacy," she said quietly. She slipped the key around her neck, a tangible connection to her grandfather's journey, and a reminder of how the past shaped the present. Then she unlocked her door and stepped inside, Lucas following at a respectful distance. The interior of the shed felt different now, no longer a hermetically sealed sanctuary, but a space open to possibility, to connection to growth. The destruction she had wrought in her anger had been cleared away, the studio area reorganized to accommodate tomorrow's planning meeting. "Would you like some tea?" she asked Lucas, the simple act of hospitality, still feeling new but increasingly natural. "I'd like that." As she heated water on her small stove, Eleanor gazed out the window at her property, seeing it with new eyes. Not just as her private refuge, but as part of a larger ecosystem, both natural and human, that deserved protection and stewardship. "Do you think we can win?" she asked, handing Lucas a steaming mug. "Against Westridge, against all their resources and connections?" Lucas considered the question seriously. "I think the fact that you're asking about we instead of I means you have already won something important." He gestured to the transformed shed around them. "You found a way to engage with the world without surrendering what matters to you. That's a victory in itself." Eleanor nodded, understanding what he meant. The balance she had been seeking between privacy and connection, between independence and community, was not a fixed point, but a dynamic process, a continuous negotiation of boundaries and bridges. "I still need my space," she said, "my solitude, my ability to create on my own terms." "Of course you do," Lucas agreed. "That's part of who you are. But now it's a choice rather than a fortress." As evening settled over the land, they sat together in comfortable silence, watching through the windows as the special pigments on the shed's exterior shifted with the changing light. Like the structure itself, Eleanor Hayes had been transformed not by abandoning her nature, but by revealing it more honestly to the world. The battle with Westridge was just beginning. Maxwell Carter would return with new tactics, new pressure, new attempts to secure the aquifer his father had coveted for decades. But Eleanor was no longer facing that future alone, hidden behind weathered walls and cultivated obscurity. She had inherited her grandfather's fight, but she would wage it differently, not in isolation, but in community, not in bitterness, but in hope, not just opposing destruction, but creating alternatives. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, reflected in the puddles left by the storm that had changed everything. Inside, Eleanor Hayes stood in the center of the home she had built, surrounded by evidence of her past and possibilities for her future, finally at peace with both. The shed at the edge of town still stood, as it had for decades, weathered, enduring, deceptive in its simplicity. But now, like its occupant, it had a new purpose, not to hide from the world, but to show it a different way forward.